Hey, hello, hi. Welcome to and/or back to the EquiTheory podcast. I am your host, Jill Treese, and this week's episode has lots going on. I've got a few things I want to cover. Catch you guys up on some things going on with my horses, and some of the things that, in my time off that I've been able to sort of pour more energy into and look more into, learn more about, and answer a submission question to give you guys a preview of the premium feed. So let's get into it. All right. Welcome. We are back in business, baby. But before we dive into the content, I got to do an ad slot. But if you are a premium feed subscriber, you're not going to hear an ad. And if you'd like to become one, please check the description below for the Supercast link where you can subscribe to the premium feed of the podcast. It's on a sliding scale. You can pay what you want. That's all I'll say about that. And let's roll the ad. Okay, see, for those of you who are premium feed, there was nothing there. Just a light pause from me. Whew, deep breath. Okay, so it's been a minute since I did this. I think I'm clipping because I'm talking so loud. So I'm just going to turn myself down a little bit. But yeah, so I've got like nervous energy. It's been such a minute since I have been like really in the swing of things podcasting, and I'm really looking forward to getting back in the chill headspace about it, where it's not like I feel like my voice is shaking because I'm literally alone in my house. The boyfriend has departed. I do have the cats and the dog in the house, but I'm nervous. You're making me nervous. Stop it. Yeah, so lots been going on, lots of podcasting things. Also, it feels so good. Like this truly, I know that everybody and their grandmother has a podcast. Okay. But like something about it feels so I love it. I am a talker. I always have been. And anytime I talk anybody in my personal life's ear off, I go, see, that's why I have a podcast, to help prevent this from happening to you. And, also, I could talk endlessly. I just enjoy it, and I hope that you guys do too. I've gotten some interesting feedback. My favorite ones are always the ones that are intended to be compliments, where they're like, I really love the unscripted, unplanned, conversational, just whatever pops into your head, chaotic, unorganized style of your podcast. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. It's totally intended. It's artistic that way, and has nothing to do with my cat walking across my keyboard. Yeah, cool. But yeah, so I think it's funny because, when I brought the podcast back last time after that break, and I was doing more of the video focused, I tried really hard to plan the episodes, and what ends up happening is that I just overthink it, and then I have nothing to talk about, and I struggle to talk for 30 minutes. Whereas when I stream of consciousness record, it can be up to 3 or 4. So, but yeah, getting back into it is a little bit like, oh, what do I talk about? Because so much of my life has not revolved around horses lately. And I think that's where I just have to be honest about it, instead of, because I felt this pressure to be like, okay, let me like peel my brain for things that I've done with the horses lately that I can talk about on my horse podcast. But the point of the rebrand and bringing it back the way that I did was to sort of open the door for more beyond just horse focused, because like I said a million times, the podcast goes through cycles because I do, and I'm the only one working on it. So it's kind of hard to approach it from a place of inauthenticity. If I'm not like knee deep and focused on horses, then it's hard to want to do a podcast like that. But I love podcasting. So then I'm in this weird limbo zone of like, I want a podcast, but my podcast is about horses. I can't do that. And then, so yeah. And the reality is like, create the life you want to live. So here we are. I'm opening the door for it to be a horse and human podcast, which is what I said last time I brought it back, but whatever. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back in the swing of things where, because every time I take a break, it always takes me a few episodes to like really get back in the rhythm where I don't really have to think about it and I can just sort of turn on the mic and get after it. But I do believe we're already off to a better start than the last one. The last one I recorded like 400 times because I just couldn't get into it. Like it's hard to find that flow again when you've been out of it for a while. But yeah, so read the last episode. Oh my God, you guys, like I would say I'm speechless, but then this would not be a great episode since it is audio only. I will say that there is a visualizer on YouTube where you can sort of just set it up, and I edited like an hour of footage of me and Zoe and Azula and some of the babies and other horses just throughout time that I've been on the internet. Just a little time capsule of sorts, but also something that if you are a YouTube listener, that you have something to look at when you glance up from your artwork or whatever it is you do when you listen to the episodes. But yeah, so it's, I think that's a cool little thing, but, God, I have so many thoughts in my head. Okay. Get organized. So number one, if you don't mind, please subscribe to the YouTube channel because it can't make money until it's over 1,000 subscribers. And that would be nice because this is kind of my only income source at the moment. Ooh, what a dark realization. But yeah, we love being an intern. It's going well. But yeah, so I just want to find a way to express my like blown awayedness and genuine shock at the reception to the last episode. Like the comments and the story posts and the emails I got, and just like, oh, it's so much to respond to, but please do know that I am a chronic respond avoider. I've just decided to embrace it rather than be stuck in this constant perpetual state of not responding and feeling horrible about it and then apologizing profusely. So now we're kind of entering the era of that's who I am. Sorry. I very much struggle to respond. However, I do thoroughly appreciate everything that all of you have sent me. I read so many messages that I was just showing my boyfriend, like, what is happening? Like this, I don't know. I love this podcast, and I know that a lot of people really, really enjoy it and really care about it. But it's one thing to like sort of know that, and then to also receive the reception that the last episode got. It really means a lot to me, and I can't express enough like how grateful I am for you guys that listen and all of the nice things that were said. And yeah, I mean, cause I feel like I'm shouting into the void sometimes, and it's not the most interesting podcast in the world. Just me rambling about struggling to podcast usually, and saying, a lot. But yeah, man, it's just been so nice and heartwarming to read and listen to all the messages. So thank you guys. Now I will wrap up the sap train, and yeah, God, I don't know why my voice is shaking so much. Sorry. That's gotta be wonky to listen to, but, yeah, I'm excited. I'm nervous. I got all the things happening. Yeah. So let me transition a little bit here. What has been going on? So like I said in the last episode, which was more of the overview episode, this one I feel like I can chill a little bit and like actually get into some things. So yeah, the past year or so, I've been in practicum and internship 1 for school. So I am getting my master's of clinical mental health counseling. Say it with me. How many times regular listeners have heard that? But so end goal will be, I'm already practicing as a therapist, but after this fall, which I'll be taking internship 2 this fall, which basically I'm just doing the same thing as internship 1, just finishing out my hours. I wrote my capstone paper. Like I'm set. I just will have to take the national counselor examination, and which you don't have to do until the end, like till you're applying for licensed professional counselor, which I still got a long way before I can do that. But yeah, our school likes us to take it early, and I'm here for that. So after I graduate, I'll be applying to the Arkansas board to get my license, associate counselor license. So I'll be an LAC for a couple years to get more clinical hours. And then after that, I will be an LPC, which is licensed professional counselor. So quite a long road. We love that. So what I heard from that was over the next 2 years after I graduate, I am going to be working like a dog to get my hours met so that I can have the LPC licensure, which really frees me up for a lot of job opportunity sorts of things. It also comes with a pay raise, obviously. So, there's lots of benefits to knocking that out quickly. But yeah, so that's sort of what's on the horizon for me. But I would like to talk a little bit about the therapy thing, if you guys don't mind, because wowie, that has been life-changing. Yeah, I think the last time that I recorded was I think it was last August. So that would have been right before I was going into practicum. So I don't even think I had talked about that. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I don't think I had been in clinical practice, but honestly, that was the best time for me to take a break from the podcast because there was so much adjustment that had to happen there. Namely in the realm of work-life balance, had to get real good at that real quick. Had to get very good about self-care. And yeah, I mean, cause being a therapist, being someone's therapist that they're coming to with their deepest, darkest hopes, dreams, fears, trauma, hopes, I mean, everything it's very intense and can be heavy and can also be the most beautiful and heartwarming, inspiring job. It is very, very, very fulfilling for me. But also I have seen it result in a lot of burnout in the year that I've been actually in the field. It is a tough field to be in, but, overall I think that the benefits outweigh the costs, if you will. But, yeah, that was really a good time for me to take a break and just, I took a break from everything except focusing on finding out who I am as a therapist and trying to show up for clients as my most authentic and centered self, which has been a really interesting journey. It's one of those things that I don't know that I could sum up in one episode. It may be something I have to brainstorm on. If you guys are interested in that, then I can come up with some points and some things that I did. Because it has been a really fulfilling and really interesting journey. And most of it honestly started with going into internship, but also, my acne, weirdly enough. So I think I touched on it a little bit in the I'm Back episode, but, I have been struggling with acne for, I guess, 2 years now. And this week was the first time in 2 years that I didn't have a painful, aggravated spot of acne on my face, and everything looked healed. My face is scarred, but that I can cover with makeup and whatever. But I've been wearing my face pretty much all summer without makeup, just letting it breathe and doing the research, trying to switch to things that will not aggravate my skin makeup wise. And oh my God, it has been not just switching makeup, but it's been a lifestyle change, a proper lifestyle change, bruv. So yeah, that's another thing that I'm happy to divulge into, because I don't know how many of you struggle with body things like acne, hormone imbalances, gut health issues, but like that is where my head has been for the past 2 years, trying to fix that and figure out what all of that means. And so, you know, this podcast got started with me having a hyperfixation on positive reinforcement, diving into all of that. So, this year's hyperfixation was, oh my God, how do I get rid of my freaking acne? I'm so tired of this. So I did all of the reading, all of the research, watching videos, podcasts, listening to other people talk about it. And really the gist of it was it all comes from the inside. No topical treatment, no like skincare, beauty products. Nothing is going to fix it unless you address what's going on inside. It's a reaction to internal issues, be that hormone imbalance, gut problems, which are often linked. And you know, it's very, very fascinating. So yeah, that's where my head has been, my God, and trying to bring that level of self-care to myself. Like what I've done for the horses and researching and reading so much about them. I always joked, and I think I even joked on the podcast about like how much research I've done into equine nutrition and diet, all of that good stuff. And I know nothing about mine. I couldn't care less to read about mine. And I think that is symbolic of something. I hear that a lot among horse people, you know, just being like, yeah, my horse gets all this stuff, and, you know, I make sure that they have every last little supplement that they could need, that there's not a hair out of place. But then my room's a mess. You know, I eat ramen every night, whatever. And, you know, obviously a lot of that comes from a damaged and problematic society where there's not enough time, so to speak, to take care of yourself. And not enough resources to take care of yourself, especially if you want horses, because that's where your time and resources go, because that's your passion. That's what you love. But I have been on the front lines of seeing how much the sparkle of your passion can just like snuff out if you're not taking care of you. And it sounds so cliche, but truthfully, one of the biggest things that's brought me so close to in my relationship with Azula particularly is that focus on taking care of me. And a lot of you were so nice in your comments. You know, every time I'd post about like the podcast is coming back, I don't know when, but it will be back. I've just been focusing on me, my life, trying to get myself in order and figure out, you know, what everything means to me. And it's been a journey. And I thank you all for the comments that were like, take your time. We're here when you're coming back. I did see those, and they meant a lot at the time and now. But what I was saying about Azula is that so much of my bond and my relationship with her has, at least in my opinion, come from not asking anything of her, not asking anything of myself, and just being with her, noticing what's happening in my body, noticing what's happening with her, and just sort of lowering all of the expectation, the tension. And listen, I can feel my resistance coming up when I'm talking about this, because I know when I hear people talk about, you know, just slow it down and just like go be with the horses, that sometimes that's like, okay, great. But like my horse needs to go to the vet and she needs to get on a trailer, and my horse needs to be ridden because he has, you know, weight issues or whatever the case may be. Yes, all very true. But I do think that there is something incredibly, incredibly, incredibly overlooked to a large degree in the horse world, because like, and I mean, before I move on, that thing being that connection, because at least the way that I was brought up in the horse world, so much of it was like your connection comes from you being badasses and tackling crazy combinations on cross country. Like that's your connection. And you love the horse and you have a snuggle in the stall when they're tired after cross country. But like my definition and my understanding of connection has really changed over the past year because I've had a connection now unlike any I've ever had before with a horse. And that's with Azula, obviously. Because for the first time, like I think ever in my life, as a little ADHDer who has a lot of ideas and a lot of complicated thoughts, we'll say, around perfectionism and what it is to be enough. And for me, a lot of that has been like, how much can I put out? I mean, good God, I was posting on Instagram from like the age of 13, like it was my job. And at a point it was my job, posting every day, if not multiple times a day on multiple platforms, weekly on YouTube, doing the podcast. I mean, like working with brands, shooting ads and like doing all of this stuff, trying to get content constantly and producing and not for really a whole lot, honestly. Like, obviously the impact that I was able to have in the horse world is something that I will forever like be grateful for and hold very, very close to my heart. But in terms of like, what did I really get out of it? I think it filled a void for a while of, just not really feeling like I fit in super well. Arkansas is just, it's never been my end all be all place. I've always felt like an outsider here, and some of that comes from that not good enough complex, but others come from just having different values and different interests in the world and life, and it's been a little bit of a incongruency. It's chafed a little bit growing up, but so I've had a lot of thoughts about like, be productive, produce more, every time I'm with the horses, like, should I photograph this? Like, how can I set my phone up to record a video without the other horses knocking it over? Like everything's just been so busy. There's just this buzzing constantly of like thought and action and like, how can I make this time worth something? And a lot of that has been in, is it productive? And in what sense? Like, what's it working towards? If it's not working towards anything that I can like show in the realm of on social media or monetarily, then like, probably not making the best use of my time. And the past year, stepping away from social media and not worrying about posting has completely freed me up. Like, it's been weird because I'll compare it to this. Okay. So once upon a time, I had horrible vision. I could not see at all. And I had contacts and glasses and all that good stuff. And then found out that my insurance at the time covered LASIK eye surgery. And so I did it. And then for like the next 6 to 8 months, every morning I woke up and I was like, I'm missing something. I forgot to do something because I forgot to put my contacts in because I don't have to anymore. So that was the exact same feeling of stepping away from social media and then going out with the horses. And I'm like, I should be doing something. And realizing in the moment, I am. Like, just being is enough. And I don't have to be like doing per se. I can just be present and then see what happens, because I've never done that before. There were always those fleeting moments of like just being and feeling, but it was usually in some sort of context of like, I wasn't doing so well mentally. And so I went out with the horses to go sit and just breathe for a moment. That was the call at the time. Some people meditate, some people, sit on their porch and drink their coffee in the morning. And for me, that was how I cleared my head, but it was never to this degree. So let me just get to the darn point here. I just found myself really over the past year wandering out into the field with Azula and just being, and just like, unfortunately, my Philly belly just will not accept me to just stand there. I have to be doing, which is probably honestly for the better. And I think that's why we work super well together. Just because there are these little things that just fit so well, like puzzle pieces. But yeah, so because if I sit, I have a tendency to distract if I'm not paying attention to something, watching something, thinking about something. It's very hard for me to meditate. And in studying therapy and listening to other horse people, I always hear on Warwick's podcast, Warwick Schiller, on the Journey On podcast, he talks about, every time you realize that you're no longer meditating, that you've gotten distracted, that's meditating. And I've worked on that some, not as much as I'd like, but the closest I feel that I get to that naturally without really much thought is just when I'm with Azula. And it just sort of happens. I go out there with her, and my favorites are when it's noon and her and the herd have sort of made their way to the top of the hill at the back of their field. And the sun's shining, and when it's like 60 or 70 degrees out and it's not humid, which is very rare in old Arkansas. But I have a particular day in mind that I'm remembering. And just going out there with her with no expectation, just to go say hi, really, and finding her hanging out at the top of that hill and just finding my hands, rubbing in places that I feel drawn to, using namely the Masterson method. I'm not like a pro at it, and I haven't like properly studied it. I did have him on the podcast not all that long ago, maybe a year or so. And I have flipped through his book. I haven't set time aside to read it. But I am familiar with the bladder meridian, and I just find myself finding those spots of tension and noticing her, and noticing when she takes a little bit harder blink, or her nostril tenses, or her ear flicks, and then watching that release as I lighten and release. And it's very, very centering for some reason. And I think you can even hear that if you go back and listen to the episode with Jim Masterson, you sort of hear that in the way that he talks, that he's had a lot of experience. It's a very, very, very mindful practice, because you are constantly orienting yourself to the present. You're noticing, you're focused on two of your senses. What do you see? What do you feel? And really tuning into that, as well as on another level, which I'd argue is another sense of ours, is tuning into that of another being. Like, what are you receiving from them? What are they receiving from you? How is that give and take, that connection? And it's been really, really healing for me in a way, because I don't know, I've always been a rather independent human, that, like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I feel like I had an issue with touch, to some degree. Not really sure where that comes from. I think it was just really, not coming from a super like huggy, touchy family. And I didn't really have friends that were like that either. And maybe they weren't like that because I wasn't like that. But, I don't know, for whatever reason, I just kind of like skipped that part. And in my reading and therapy and humans and connection, healing, blah, 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 all that, all that mumbo jumbo. I've really begun to understand the importance of touch, the power of touch, and how much that can change things. And I think it's really interesting that the times that my mind is most quiet are when I'm touching and being and just existing with Azula. And it's wild because that's not something that I'm like super accustomed to, not super used to. And that I'm able to find balance in that, I think is really fascinating. So just having those moments with her, where I sort of just go out to her. I think the most important part is going out without being like, this is going to be some magical connecting moment. Never once have I had that thought. Now I'll probably be struggling to not have that thought. But really just to go check on her, say, hey, what's up? What are you doing? And then if she's snoozy, I just kind of be with her and stroke her, pat her, do all the pony things. And, yeah, it's been very healing and very grounding. And I find that those are the times where my mind is quiet. There's a stillness where I don't have to think or do or worry or be. I just am. And I am with her. And I don't expect anything of her. She can just be also. And I think those moments have really brought us very close together, because when she orients to something, I orient to something. I show her in many ways that I notice her, that I am aware of my surroundings, I'm aware of her, and just having that relationship that I think is what builds the trust and the bond. And yeah, it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of reading, like I said, in multiple areas. I've only recently started like reading into human stuff, but there's this book that I'm sure at this point in your life you have heard of, and if you haven't, I'm excited to be the first one to tell you. There's this book called The Body Keeps the Score, and I think I mentioned it in the last episode that I've been listening to it on Audible. I'll listen to a chapter and then I'll read the chapter because I have a physical copy. Because I prefer physical copies, but I also feel like I do better having both listening and seeing to read, because brain is distractible. But it also really helps me like get the information in there and then taking notes. Sorry for the burp. Wouldn't be a podcast without it. But yeah, so I've been reading The Body Keeps the Score, and like I said, the book has some highly graphic parts. Some stuff that could have probably used a trigger warning. Granted, it is a book all about trauma, so it does have lots of descriptions of extremely traumatic events, but the science involved and the explanation of how the body receives and stores trauma has been really, really interesting. And I'm just, fascinated and enthralled with it. It's taken me a really long time to get through it because I keep like going back and rehashing things. But one of the topics that it covers a lot is that a lot of people have grown up in this world without a secure attachment figure where they truly felt safe, where they could go to this person with anything, that there would be no judgment, no criticism. They would be met with love, be shown that they are heard and valued and seen. And that when you've grown up without that, and I'm not saying that I have, but I found a similar experience in what was described, that a lot of these kids that maybe grew up in foster care that have been through that, or in their own homes that have had neglectful or abusive families that weren't just able to trust another person, really found a unique and healing companionship in horses and also dogs, but that's a footnote. Horses. That's what this podcast is about, since it's a dog podcast. I think it's so fascinating that out of all the animals in the world, that horses and dogs seem to be the ones that are most useful in therapy. Because listen, I love me some kitty cats. Love them. Especially kittens. Cute. And my kitten cats, perfect. Wonderful angels. Zuko Cornelius and Wally Bubby. They are my heart and soul. But it's interesting that people don't use them in therapy. I wonder if it's more of an allergy thing. But I guess people are allergic to horses and dogs too, but I don't know. Anyway, so I think horses is an interesting mention there though, because like obviously equine assisted therapy exists, but I think it's fascinating because horses aren't like super common. Like they're not everywhere. They are, but they aren't, you know what I mean? Like not the way that cats or maybe bunnies or guinea pigs are, but there's something very healing and special about horses. The way they work is through social relationships, and they have an antenna of sorts and an aura about them, a very large electromagnetic field, big heart, and they sync up with us. And if you can find a way to be present, to center yourself and just be, there's a lot to be gained by being a part of that, and like really feeling felt and understood by another being. And I think that that's where a lot of relationships go awry with horses and humans, because, like I'm ride or die for positive reinforcement and clicker training. But a lot of where I found that I was struggling with teaching was that sometimes if you're not super hyper perceptive, it's very easy to miss things. But I don't believe that you have to be super hyper perceptive to be a good horse person, or to really connect with horses, or to show that you're connected with horses to the horse. There have been so many sirens going by. I hope that you can't hear it, but it's super distracting. Anyway, so to show that to horses, I think takes an attunement process, right? I know Warwick Schiller talks a lot about this, and it's something that I focus on a lot in human therapy because, and I mentioned Warwick because I know he's the only one that I've heard, at least recently, talk about sort of that. It's a woo-woo factor, but it's also not a woo-woo factor, because we know this very well about humans, that there's a need for attachment. You must have attachment. There's a lot of work from Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby, two of the pioneers in attachment theory. Sue Johnson has really pushed that research forward in adults and relationship. And so it's just, there's so much like rich history, and I think it's really beautiful that need for connection. And a lot of that comes from noticing and being noticed, and having somebody respond in a way that shows that they see you, that they notice you, rather than invalidating, judging, criticizing, suppressing, all of those things. And I think a lot of what happens in relationship with horses is that we sort of bring what we were shown to that relationship. Like if for instance, you cried or you had feelings of anger when you were a child, and you were told, stop crying, don't cry, crying is weak, or don't get angry, you need to handle it more responsibly or more maturely, then like the only answer there, well, there's a couple, but what you're told is what you're feeling is not right. Stop feeling that. It's bothering me. It's inconvenient to me. And it distances you from me. And if that's your attachment figure, like a parent or a sibling, a grandparent, whomever your caretaker is, then your response to having these emotions is don't have these emotions, hide them, conceal them, respond differently, or you risk that attachment. And I think we, unintentionally have a tendency to bring that to the horses. When a horse is scared of something, how many times do you hear, I'm super guilty of this as well, invalidating statements like, it's just a plastic bag, come on. Like, or it's just a shadow, get over yourself. Like that energy, imagine what it does. Like if your horse is a small child that depends on you and cares about you, and you say, oh my God, you're really scared of that, get over it. Like the response is, uh-oh, now I'm alone. And this is anthropomorphic, but I'm using this to paint a picture here. So if you were to tell this child, get over it, it doesn't matter, like that's a stupid thing to be afraid of, then now the child is like, I'm still scared. Telling me to simply get over it doesn't make me no longer afraid. So now I'm alone. And now I can't express that I'm afraid because the person that I care about and I need in my life to feel safe doesn't like it when I react this way. So now I'm in a rock and a hard place here because I'm still afraid of the thing. I haven't gotten over it. And now I'm doubly afraid that my attachment figure is now, going to leave me or doesn't see me, resents me in some way. So, I think we bring a lot of that, like I said, to the relationship with horses where we're like, get over it, stop. And then it creates this adversarial relationship where instead of stopping, acknowledging the thing that is frightening, perhaps helping the horse to create some distance from the thing so they can assess from an area where they feel more secure, and then slowly helping them understand that this isn't something that they need to fear, by creating distance. Like say it's a plastic bag that's like stuck in the ground somehow. It's not moving, but it's flapping and the horse is afraid of it. And you come up to it and the horse is like, oh my God, no. Give it a beat, maybe use a splitting behavior. If you've read Language, Signs, and Calming Signals of Horses by Raquel Dreisma, the term she uses is splitting. Put yourself between the horse and the thing that it's afraid of, and which is a protective gesture, and then help create distance by encouraging the horse to slowly, calmly move away, and then find a space where the horse can assess the thing from a distance where they now feel safe and it's not a huge concern anymore. So in doing so, you've shown the horse, oh, I see that that's scaring you. Now I will help you out of this situation safely. Whereas if you say, oh, come on, it's not that big a deal. Come over here, put your nose on it. Now you're saying, I recognize that you're afraid. I'm now going to force you to interact with this thing that you're afraid of. And now I'm also scary. And a lot of horses have histories of being forced onto things that they're afraid of. So they might have a past history of remembering being, bumped with the lead rope or pulled or yanked on or smacked, whatever. So all of those things might come up as well. Whereas you could just say, hey, I see that you're scared. Sometimes I find it helps to label it aloud because some of us, in American culture, emotions are not a super well talked about thing, that we don't have a lot of literacy in emotion. Like when you say, what are you feeling to someone? They go, oh, I'm fine, or I'm good, which is not a feeling, which, sure, it's fine. It's semantics to a point, but also is it, or, I'm feeling sad today, or I'm struggling a little bit with grief. I'm grieving. What is the feeling? So to name that with your horse, I can see that you're scared. It's all right. Let me help you out of this situation. And then we can address it together. We can seek it out as a team safely. And the more you have interactions and, situations like that, the more trust and rapport you build, the more confidence your horse has in you. And, obviously there will always be circumstances where it's not possible sometimes you just have to walk past the plastic bag. But to take a beat, slow it down, and not have judgment about it, not have malintent. And if you do, to make a note of that, if you find yourself with your horse and being like, oh my God, this again, like you're spooking at that's so stupid. Like if you find something like that coming up, to take a beat and be like, okay, hold on. Where's that coming from? Whose voice is that? Is that mine? Or is that something I've heard before that I've now internalized, that I've adopted as a part of who I am? Take a look at that. Is this something that I believe? Oh, I just bumped the mic. is this something that I believe? Is this truly how I feel about this? Or is this something that, maybe doesn't align with me any longer? It's something I adopted at one point to appease someone, to fit in. But maybe now it's time to reevaluate that. Maybe I can try to work towards something different, like noticing, labeling, and helping to safety, and then calmly teaching, instead of smiting and being like, get over here, rub your nose in it. Instead, it's, okay, how can I teach you? How can I show you that this thing can be safe at your pace? But yeah, it's really interesting how dealing with our own stuff really plays into horses. And that's why I wanted to sort of bring the podcast, to have a more emphasized mental health focus as well, just because that is such a large part of my life that almost to a point I was like, the podcast will not come back unless I can, because it's just such a huge part of everyday life. And what's interesting is I find with a lot of clients that I put things in horse metaphors and backwards and forwards. So I think it's a good way to explain concepts that apply to humans as well as horses in the context of the horse-human relationship, because everybody that listens to this podcast, for the most part, has had those experiences with horses or has had the human experiences. And then you can play off whatever is most familiar to you to understand the situation, I don't know. Interesting learning element there. But that said, that is my TED Talk on whatever that was. But now I sort of want to open the door to something else. Okay. I'm going to take a quick break and I'll be back. You won't even notice. And then we're going to get into a listener submission. And we're back. Okay. So a little backstory here. I received this email not too long ago and I was like, ooh, I want to answer that. And I, like I said, am notorious for having an issue responding. So I am choosing to answer this question here because it was at the forefront. I am so sorry if you have recently sent me a message and I have not answered it. And I hate to throw up the paywall thing, but like I said, the podcast is currently my only source of income, and for as little as $5.59, you can ask me anything you want. So yeah, this is my call to action here. The Supercast link, like I said, is in the description, where you can become a premium feed subscriber. It'll show up in your regular podcast player, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, including YouTube. And you just subscribe to that feed, click on the player that you like. It is on a sliding scale, so you can choose how much you want to pay. You think it's worth $5 to $15. The 59 cents is weird, but I did that because Supercast, they charge 59 cents per listener. So I was like, okay, $5.59, then you're paying me $5, and then $59 for, honestly, a lot. It's a great platform. I'm surprised I haven't heard more about it, but anyway, so that said, you can then ask me anything, and that's how I'm doing questions now instead of Patreon. So if you have had a question that you have been wanting to ask or weren't able to ask when I was on break or weren't able to do through Patreon, now is your chance. I will be answering those in the premium feed episodes. So my plan for the premium feed, like I said, is to have some maybe more deep dive episodes. Like if the dominance theory episodes, that might be one that I put on the premium episode only. The ones that require a lot of time, effort, energy, and research that, take a lot of time away from other things that I have going on. Those would probably be more behind a paywall. I do offer a lot of free content, so I don't feel too bad about it. But yeah, you can also just support the podcast that way. There's a donation option if you don't want the premium feed to deal with. But how it'll work is there's a feature on there where you can ask me anything, and you just tippity type your little question on in there and ask it, and then I will in premium episodes read the question and answer it, so long as it's show appropriate, of course. And give my thoughts. I do want to mention here before I go into explaining or detailing that I don't want this to come across or be perceived as a replacement for any mental health service or any equine behavior consulting service. I more rather answer the questions in the realm of to be educational, to be entertaining and thought-provoking. So as always, I recommend that you enlist the help of a local behavior consultant. Now, I do understand it's hard. There are few and far between, and it's hard to find one with time. Some do online consulting, but they're also busy, so it can be taxing to try and get that. So that's why I wanted to offer this on the podcast as well, where you have a space to sort of get another perspective on what's going on, but I do not want it to be perceived as a replacement for proper consulting, because that's not what it is. Again, more just to give you a starting place, give you some ideas on how to get started, but it is ultimately on you to practice due diligence. And those are my legal disclaimers. Okay. So you can ask me anything on there. I will answer it in the premium feed episodes. And if you're a subscriber, you will be able to hear the answer to that. So I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with and getting that premium feed rolling and started. Okay. So this question comes from a listener. Now, they did not specifically ask for it to be read on the podcast, so I'm going to anonymize. But I seem to do better than like writing an email form to just speak it aloud. This question is regarding a horse that bites rather, a little bite. So I have lots of thoughts on this, but I'm going to start by reading. So this is the condensed version of the message. I was wondering if you could discourse what a horse who nips means. My mare was scoped and treated for ulcers, and I've seen a huge difference in her. She's done with treatment, but still nips when you go to pet her. I've been working on consent-based care in the past months and also asking her if I can move into her space, which seems to be working to make her feel much more comfortable. My question is, why would she continue to nip? Is it a learned history from the ulcer? You couldn't groom, tack up, or in any way pet her without her biting at you. She's on gastric support feed and a ration balancer in order to keep her sugars down, so I don't think the ulcers are back since she's in a very low stress environment and from what I observe with low sugar grains. Could I also be influencing this behavior by expecting it, which I thought was an interesting element of this question. Also, what could I do to make her more comfortable when being around me? Just so you know, I am younger, which means I don't have everything I could want for her. She's at my house, so I have full control over her living situation outside 24/7 with other horses in a field that they rotate. Okay, so this is the situation. Okay, wow, where to start? So first of all, to answer could it be a learned response from the ulcers? Absolutely. That, especially if it's gone on for a long while, then like if the ulcers were present for several years for her without being addressed, and then she had lots of people touching her, tacking her up, because ulcers are interesting in that they make horses sensitive to the touch when you pet them, when you put a saddle on them, when you move their hair. I imagine it feels something similar to, like, I don't know if everyone has experienced this. It feels like a universal experience, might not be. If you've ever had long hair and you like put your hair up in a ponytail or a bun or something and your hair bends the wrong way and it just like doesn't feel good and you like can't really shake it. I imagine it's like maybe that to a lesser degree or maybe more. I don't know. But basically they're just kind of sensitive and sore all over. And so when you go to touch them, that hurts. So if this horse has been dealing with this for a long time and now isn't dealing with it, then she could very well just be expecting that it's going to hurt. first, also, congrats on having like actually pursued treatment and diagnostics. That's a very tough battle to begin, and it takes a lot to start that process. So I commend you for looking out for your pony. That's a big deal. So why would she continue to nip? The ulcers is a big part of that. Having that learned response. And then after you address it, like, why is it not going away? So beyond a learned response answer, another possible thing is what I've experienced with a young horse that likely did not have ulcers. Maybe she did. I think we went ahead and treated for it, but this particular horse was a smaller, younger horse, and she was so freaking cute, and she was like irresistible not to like walk up to and grab onto and want to like hug and smother with your love and affection. But since she was small and had started out small and been handled a lot when she was younger, what I believe ended up happening was that her flight response sort of got shut off. So thankfully I had Adele Shaw of the Willing Equine helping me. So I fully credit her for that realization because I consulted her on that. But what ended up happening and what Adele brought to light was that I believe this filly's ability or sense that she could move away was shut down. She did not believe that if something was going wrong for her, that she could just move away. If I was too in her space, that she could just back up. Instead, she would aggress. She would fight. So fight, flight. So what we actually had to do was I ended up like reinforcing her whenever she slightly moved away from me. So I sort of just taught this horse to move away and how to be like how to notice within herself when it was getting uncomfortable, and then to respond by moving away. And for her, it started out so small as just like I could see her chest muscles tensing and like her rocking away from me. And then I would click her for that and then feed. And then she would take a step back or a step to the side or just leave. And I would click her for that. And sometimes she wouldn't even like want the food reward, and she would just go on her way, and I let her, because if that's reinforcing to her, by all means go. So that's something I'm always conscious of ever since that one, that in horses that bite, they may not have their flight response as an option. So especially if it's coming from, as you put it, she's still done with treatment, but usually nips when you go to pet her. So when you're coming into her space, if she doesn't feel like she can back up and have that respected, like that will be an option. And what's worked for her is to aggress. That's what she's going to do. Remember, everything's about reinforcement, punishment. And so if you're coming into her space and when she's backed off, that's not been reinforced by having the thing that's aversive, which is, you going into her space to pet her. If that hasn't been removed, then that behavior doesn't get reinforced via negative reinforcement, right? So what does get reinforced is that when you go to pet her and she comes to bite you, you back off. Now she's been negatively reinforced to bite at you. So that may be a realm to explore, is that you reinforce. If you go to pet her and she backs up, click her and feed her. I promise you that there will come a time where once that has sort of healed, you will not have a horse that you now cannot touch, right? But it's about teaching that you now have, I'm using the word respect a lot, and maybe that's not a good word to use, but that you are aware that you see that, because horses, think about them in the field, right? There's a lot of relationship that goes on. There's a lot of noticing and very, very subtle body language. So, if one horse is walking up to another that's got its head buried in hay, if the one that's got its head buried in hay just slightly ticks its ear to pin the ear, to signal, this is my food, go away, don't bug me, the other horse is going to deviate, or they might stop, or they might graze or scratch their leg or do some other sort of calming signal, self-soothing behavior, some sort of, okay, I'm not going to do that. So it's subtle. And like I was saying earlier in that discussion about noticing, is that sometimes we're not super tuned into the world around us. And I think that has a lot to do with, again, what I was talking about, just busy minds and not taking time to slow down and take 10 minutes out of your time with your horse to just observe them, to see if you can notice as much as possible. What are their ears doing? What are their eyes doing? How are their nostrils positioned? How do their muscles look? Do they look tense? Are they kind of frantic? Are they slow? Are they methodical? So to notice all of those things, you become a safer and safer companion to them. So it's really about learning their language more than them learning ours. What does trot mean? We need to be able to have that two-way communication. So in the case of this nipping mare, it may be a case of she's not had that respected, be it from, you in the past before you started learning more. Sometimes it just happens. We can't be expected to know everything. So I hope that there's some compassion for you for that, if that has been the case. But if she's been with other people before, that maybe that's how she grew up. Maybe that was never respected. Or maybe when she was tacked up to go for a ride and she moved away when the saddle went to be put on, and somebody still put the saddle on. Well, the moving away didn't work. Now she's got to get aggressive. And then she maybe gets hit for being aggressive. And now she's just even more mad, more scared. And there's no right answer. So allowing an answer is, I think, a good start. And something I think that is truly a genius of Adele. And so thankful I had her mentorship on that one. But I think that's something that would be super easy to miss, that maybe there's an element of a flight response that's been stifled. So allowing and almost retraining that flight response is good. And you can do that in a variety of ways, right? You could just notice and reinforce if there's any movement towards flight. But if she genuinely doesn't have a flight response and just automatically goes to nip, you can set up cones and targets and teach going away, just so that behavior is built in there and it can become a default, a fallback behavior. So yeah, I mean, you just have to get creative with it on how that might look. But yeah, I think what was also interesting, let me make sure I address all the behavioristy elements first. Yeah, learned behavior, stymied flight response. Okay. Here's one more from another horse I had worked with at one point. He had an issue with me touching him, right? So I know that a lot has happened with this horse since he was in my care. So I may not be right on the money, but I think it's still a worthwhile concept. And I like to discuss things through story and not just general concepts. So you can go back in the episodes. There was an episode somewhere in the first 50, I think, me talking about a horse named Mac and a biting issue that I had with him. And he would, anytime I tried to touch him, well, it wasn't anytime, it was very unpredictable. But there were times when I would try to touch him that he would just turn and bite at me. And there was no warning. There was no ear pin, nothing. He just would turn and bite at you. And so what I worked with him on was touching me rather than me touching him. So I gave him the control. So you're talking about consent-based cues, which is a fantastic idea for a horse like this. It may be difficult to train. Now listen, okay, I will fully preface by being 100% honest. I am not the most experienced in consent-based cues. That's just not an area that I really fell into. There are some that I kind of do on accident. such as like holding up a saddle pad. And then when they touch their nose to it, then I put the saddle pad on. But if a horse has had issues with touch and doesn't feel a whole lot of power in it, it's sort of hard to get a real yes, maybe. And maybe my line of thinking is wrong on this. I'm not sure. I do want to be honest about that, but I think it's important to consider, like, is there a real yes there? Is there an option to leave, or are you sort of more risking getting bitten and teaching a consent that might work that in? I don't know. That would be my worry on it. But as you said, it seems to be making her feel much more comfortable, which is fantastic. So whatever you're doing sounds like it's working. So maybe if you incorporate some more elements, then you'll have the whole puzzle, and an ability to have a horse that can truly consent to touch. And, again, obviously, like periodic checks for ulcers, things of that nature, that might be worthwhile. I know that they're, at least as far as I'm aware, I'm not sure the credibility of them, but there are some acupressure points to check for ulcers. I'm not sure if there's been like a study that's been published on like, yes, if you press here, that highly correlates with a horse that has ulcers. I know that I have always said to use like DePaulo Equine's video where he discusses the acupressure points for horses. But as I get older and I get a little bit more critical of research, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if that's super accurate. It seems to be in my anecdotal experience, but take that with a grain of salt. Anyway, okay, so eliminating that to teach them to touch you. Like with Mac, it started with, I was in protected contact. So he was in a stall. I was outside of the stall and out of biting range. And I would teach him to touch my hand. I would hold up my hand, and if he would flick an ear at it or look at it with his eyeball, like you could see he's looking at it, then I would click him just for orienting to the hand. And then hold up my hand again, click, and repeat until he's like maybe leaning towards it to target it. And then clicking for that. Any movement of him toward me, and we're in protected contact, so I'm safe, he's safe. And I think working on touch, it's a really good idea to start in protected contact, so the horse has more of an inclination to be like, oh yeah, I can leave. And they feel a little bit safer, you feel a little bit safer, and you both can separate if need be. Especially with biting, I think that's a really good place to start. I probably should have led with that. Anyway, so in teaching that, clicking to orient to it, move toward my hand, and then eventually to where he would touch his muzzle to the palm of my hand, and I'd click him for that over and over and over and over and over again. And then we progressed to a point where, he'd have to stop chewing to listen for the clicker. So I would hold up my hand and he would touch my hand with his muzzle, and he'd probably be chewing from the previous reinforcement. And then he'd pause for a second to be like, did I hear a click? Is she going to click? And then I would click him for that. So now I've also used the environment of him moving his mouth. And now the expectation is, can you touch your muzzle to my hand with a still closed mouth? And so then we started from there and then moved into other body parts of him targeting his body to my hand. So then you can, and maybe that's what you're doing with the consent-based cues. And I think, there's somebody else that has a really good video on scratching consent. I believe it's Lauren, Equine Behavior Consultant Canada, something to that nature. She's got a TikTok, but the video's older, I believe, but she's on the IAABC board. And Fraser, Laura, I think it's Lauren Fraser or Laura. The dyslexia is getting us today. But anyway, amazing, intelligent human, and has a video on like, if you scratch and scratch and scratch and scratch and then stop, and then see if the horse like makes a move into that spot again, to almost ask, or not almost, really to ask. I do this a lot with Azula. I do it with Zoe as well. I think actually in the little visualizer that I have on YouTube that goes behind these episodes. There's a clip of me doing that with Zoe. Good luck watching the whole hour of that B-roll content. But yeah, so yeah. I lost my train of thought is what just happened. Yeah. Okay. So asking, finding that favorite itchy spot, if she has one, a horse that doesn't like touch may not have one, yet, but, to have the little itchy scratchy and then stop and see if they ask for it again. And if they don't. But yeah, so that really worked for Mac, at least as far as when I had him. I know a lot has changed for him since, but, yeah, so, okay. I want to address the other portion of this question, which is, could I also be influencing this behavior by expecting it? What can I do to make her more comfortable when being around me? So beyond the training, like formally training her, I think that there is something to be said about what you bring to a session. I'm hesitant to use the energy word because it does have such a wonky connotation. But let me maybe use an example from clinical therapy practice. So it's a really interesting thing that I've noticed. So I'll be in session with somebody and I'm chilling at this point. Not much really rattles me. I'm just sitting, hanging out, listening to this person tell their story, asking questions, participating, very in tune, listening intently. And then they, I might ask a question about, I don't know, something that's very sensitive to them, maybe a past relationship or something that hits a nerve, right? Or they start telling a story and they can look super, super relaxed and very calm, keeping it together, maybe a little tense, nothing like super, super obvious. But then all of a sudden it's like I get hit by a freight train of buzzing. Like my heart rate starts beating so hard. Or my heart starts beating and my heart rate goes up. I start sweating and I like get a little lightheaded and I'm like, whoa, what is happening? And I've been very mindful in those moments to, ask the questions like, okay, is this triggering me somehow? This has nothing to do with me. I don't relate to this. Like, I don't know where this feeling's coming from. And, I am medicated for ADHD and I've paid attention to that as well. It's not that because it's not usually in the morning when ADHD medicine is the most ADHD medicine. But like it's eliminating all variables. And, it's really interesting because I'll be like, okay, so I'm looking at you, right? And you're telling me this story and I'm wondering if there's a lot more weight to this, like that this is really sensitive and difficult for you. And it's always yes. And, then I disclose how I'm feeling and I say, and I'm wondering, are you feeling that in your body? And they go, yeah, I feel like, oh, my heart is beating. I feel like I am like, a lot is going on with me, like physiologically. And there's been no indication. They're just sitting there telling me a story. Sometimes there might be a tear or two, but for all intents and purposes, they don't look distressed. But it's something I notice that happens, a change in my body, in my physiology, that I'm not like, I have no horse in the race, right? I'm just sitting there listening, talking. The first couple of sessions I had, there were some nerves, but that doesn't really happen all that much. And, it just comes out of nowhere. And I'm like, whoa, what am I feeling right now? And then to share that with the client and then have them be like, yeah, that's what's happening in my body right now. I was like, oh, it's you, which is really interesting because I feel like the idea of energy gets denounced in Western culture. It's alternative, but I am straying in the direction of that's not the case. I don't think it's alternative. I think it is something that has been known and practiced and other cultures around the world to know the value of connection with other humans and like how much power that really does have. We're a social species. How could we not be connected? Your heart rate syncs up with people when you're in deep connection with them, when you're really paying attention, when you're intently talking to someone. The same thing happens with horses. So if you're going out with your horse and you're very nervous, that might be something to take a beat. If they're in their field and you haven't quite caught them yet, go hang out on the fence for a moment. Just watch them, observe, and center yourself. So a lot of that for me, I've noticed lately, it's really interesting. I'll get wrapped up in something, whether something pisses me off or upsets me. And I have a tendency to spiral mentally, where I get all these ruminating thoughts where I'm like, oh, I should have said this, or, oh man, I really messed that up. And and I keep replaying it in my head and I like can't stop. And it has been a serious issue for me in some relationships I've been in where I like cannot let it go. And I'm like, why? I'm not really a person that holds grudges. So I'm like, why am I so hung up on this thing? And it's an inability to sort of pull yourself back to the present. What I've noticed is it's when I get, and I'm not a fan of the word because I feel like it's thrown around so much. And I know that everybody says that about this word, but I get triggered in the sense that whatever has happened that has upset me has taken me back to something when I was a kid and maybe had less emotional regulation. And because, for a kid, like to be denied a cookie can feel earth shattering. So even something as simple as that, when you're an adult and you ask maybe your partner for something and they say no, it can send you back to that experience. So you're no longer in the present. And obviously that's maybe a trivial example, but things that remind us of traumatic, semi-traumatic, minorly traumatic, however you rate it, events that were difficult for you can take you back to those events. And it can seem, or it can distort time a little bit to where it feels as heavy as it did that time. So what I have learned, especially from reading The Body Keeps the Score, and I will disclaim here that if you are younger, please do wait to read that book until you're older. It is very intense. And like, seriously, don't read it. Like, give yourself some time to grow and be a kid and then maybe revisit it later in life. But to know that you can sort of go back to those moments. So like in this sense, it may be you're walking out to your horse and you remember all the times that she's nipped at you or bit you, and there's fear there. And so you're a little backed off. It's scary. And so you're expecting that. And like you said, that there is some level of, call it manifesting, call it speaking into existence, whatever your term is for it. I do believe that plays a role. So now there's a difference in being like, okay, this horse has bit me before. I need to be aware of that so I can be safe. But also like paying attention to what's happening in your body. So when I found myself ruminating on something or struggling to get past something mentally that's upset me in the moment, is to ground myself. So that is going through your 5 senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? And the feeling one, I think, is really important because for me, that really helps me to get back in my body. I have a tendency to intellectualize my emotions and think them to death so that I just, oh God, don't have to feel them. So to feel what my body is doing, and to really feel it, because I can be like, okay, I feel the chair holding my body. I feel the desk that I bump into. I feel the headphones on my head. Like, I can say those things, but am I really feeling those things? And to really focus your attention on what you feel. How do your pants feel on your body? Are they sitting comfortably? Are they uncomfortable? Is anything pinching? Are you holding tension in your shoulders? Is there any way you can maybe relax those a little bit? Feel that tension melt as you exhale. Can you feel the chair underneath you? How does that feel? What's the texture? Is it soft? Can you feel it touching your skin in a comforting way? Is it uncomfortable? Do you need to readjust the way you sit so that you can melt a little bit easier, sit a little bit easier? So if you're able to do something like that, when you walk out to the field, you pause at the fence and feel how the fence feels under your finger, to genuinely stop and smell the darn roses. How does it feel to be in your body? How are you doing? Is your heart beating really hard? Are you relaxed? Are you able to take a deep breath and feel the tension and anxiety dissipate on your exhale? What happens when you inhale? What happens when you exhale longer and you release? And really centering yourself, I think, takes a lot of that, like, oh no, what's going to happen? I got to think and overthink and it slows that down. I find it very difficult, especially because, like I said, I'm really good at tricking myself into thinking that I am present. I'm like, okay, I did all the senses, but like, did I? Or did I just like rattle off a bunch of things around me? But like, to actually be like, what is that smell? Can I place it? What is it? What are the notes in the smell, And to really, like, the goal is to get yourself present back in your body, So the other thing is one of my favorite quotes, sort of, I don't know, there's a lot that I've learned from listening to the guests and also Warwick that he's had on his podcast. Like, I feel like I've learned a lot. It's made me consider a lot in both life and in my relationship with horses. And I think marrying those two, the positive reinforcement and the consent-based training and the attunement element, I almost think you can't do one without the other. Because, I mean, you can use any training methods with a horse, but can you make them feel safe? Not only through, like, intended conditioning, but also intentional interaction and being with them. And teaching them that it's safe to be with you just by showing them and proving to them that you see them, you see their fears, you see their favorites, and you are a part of that. So one of my favorite quotes is when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So if you're looking at your horse as a horse that has a biting problem that always nips, then that is what you sort of see. That's what you invite. When is she not nipping? What are you doing? What is she doing when she's not biting? Is that something to pay attention to? How do you create more moments like that? How do you turn your attention to moments like that and reinforce that? So I think a problem that we often run into as a problem-oriented culture is what's going wrong. Okay, I don't want X, Y, and Z. I run into this with clients a lot too. I'll ask, okay, tell me what your ideal life looks like. What's the issues now? What's the goals, the hopes, all of that? What does your ideal world look like? Obstacles removed. And usually it starts out like, well, I want to have more money and I don't want to have to worry about the house anymore. I don't want to have to worry about the kids. I don't want to feel X, Y, and Z. And it's a list of I don'ts. Well, that's like, how on earth do you know what you want if you can't tell me the opposite, and I'm almost speaking to myself in the moment more so, I think, because that's been a lot of my life is no, wrong. Instead of, hey, that's something. What if we did it this way? Try this. That's good, but maybe this, So instead of I don't want my horse to bite, what do you want? Like in the example of Mac, it was a teach the opposite situation. I want him to interact with my hand with his mouth closed and not moving and in a way that was safe for me. So that is what I focused on. How can I teach him to interact with me in a way that is, safe for him, safe for me? So focusing on the I want my horse to not do X, Y, and Z has a tendency to lead to punishment, pain, or fear. So a lot of people in the traditional world, and sometimes even the positive reinforcement world, end up with like, oh, this horse, when I go to girth him up, he bites and he kicks. And so I don't want him to do that. So I'm just going to punch him or kick him or, tighten the girth slower. I don't want him to do this behavior. Stop it. So the only option out of those that might have some validity is the tighten the girth slower, because you're not directly being like, stop that behavior. Okay, great. You don't want the behavior to happen. What do you want the horse to do? How are you helping the horse do what you want it to do? Or are you just expecting it to pull this solution out of thin air? That the horse is, maybe like in the case of the listener submission, the horse has ulcers, and somebody goes to put a saddle on the horse and girth it up, and the horse bites at them, and maybe they give it a smack on the shoulder and say, stop biting. You've completely ignored all of the possible issues. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir on this podcast a bit, but you're not giving the horse the alternative. Okay. The horse is communicating to you very loudly. That is a desperate communication. That hurts. And then you smack and you say, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. You think that hurts? I'll show you hurt. Instead of, something's wrong. Let me reevaluate and we'll revisit the girth later. I think it could avoid a lot of issues, like this listener is struggling with a horse that now potentially has a learned behavior of just dismissing human touch altogether, which is sad because there's so much bonding and joy that can come from that. And some horses are just, they just don't like to be touched, and that's fine too. I think it's finding that respect and that level between you two that only you and your horse are going to know by you paying attention to them. So if you haven't already, I do recommend that Raquel Dreisma book, The Language, Signs, and Calming Signals of Horses, because it really does help you to become a better observer, to learn those signs of discomfort or unease, that you can address them sooner. And I think that will go a long way with this horse as well. But to identify what you want. How do you want your horse to feel? How do you want them to behave? What do you want them to do? And instead of thinking in terms of what you don't want them to do, well, I don't want my horse to be scared. Okay, how do you want them to feel? I want them to feel safe. Okay, how do I make them feel safe? Explore that and identify what behaviors might come along with that. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up. In conclusion, mindfulness for you, for what you're bringing, and shifting your focus a little bit. I think that happens kind of naturally when you switch to positive reinforcement anyway, when you're so used to reprimanding and correcting constantly in the traditional world. Obviously not every traditional rider is like that, but it is largely like, okay, the horse is going around, not fast enough, kick, go faster, too fast, pull back, slow down. And in positive reinforcement, it's much more looking for what the horse is doing right. And I think the next step in that is, okay, there's a behavior occurring that I don't like. What do I want the horse to do instead? And then breaking down how you teach that, what the possible reasons are for the bad behavior or unwanted behavior, and then fleshing it out that way. So I think we covered ensuring that the ulcers are truly gone, which it sounds like you've done a pretty solid job of doing that. Then helping with that consent-based training, teaching that it's okay to move away, that flight response, trying to help turn that back on, get that back online. And what was the other one? Reconditioning all around. And I think that starts from a distance over protected contact where you feel safe, the horse feels safe, and you're able to step away and take a moment to recenter if you find yourself getting worked up. And then I think a lot of that also just being and observing and existing with the horse, finding time and quiet moments instead of, every interaction being training, which I don't know if this listener, if that's the case, especially if they live at your house, you might spend a lot of time with them. So just be mindful of what does that time that you spend with them look like? What are you doing? What are they doing? Are you perhaps too close? Are you perhaps too far? But yeah, I think that about wraps it up. I'm getting quieter. My voice is getting tired. I haven't talked this long consecutively in quite some time. But yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. Give you a little taste of what a premium episode might be like, which most of you probably already know from the past Q&A episodes. It'll be very similar to that. Let me talk into the mic. But yeah, so be sure to join the premium feed if you want to, if you're able to. Thank you endlessly for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe on whatever streaming service you're using. I think Spotify has where you can rate the episodes. You can comment on episodes. I'm always open to hearing ideas for episodes. So if you are listening on Spotify, go ahead and look at your player. Tell me what you want to listen to. And give me some feedback, some ideas so that I'm tailoring it to you and to me, But with that said, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys endlessly for listening and being a part of this. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Okay, bye.